Paul Gatling with the Northwest Arkansas Business Journal. Joining me today is Ross DeVol. He is the founding president and CEO of a new research institute in Bentonville called Heartland Forward. Ross, always good to see you.
Pleasure to be here, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming in. You and I had kind of, you'd hinted about this institute about a year ago when we did an interview, and so I know obviously a lot of planning has gone into it, so congratulations getting to this
Thank
point.
you.
I know the kind of research you're doing really excites you and you're really involved in it.
I am very passionate about it. This idea kind of germinated as a result of the 2016 presidential election about becoming clear that people in the center of the country, the heartland, many of them felt like they'd been forgotten, left behind, that economic performance had not been as strong as it had on the coast, and an idea to address it, bringing capital here for investment, creating jobs. And so the idea was to create something that had sustainability, that showed there was a commitment to improve economic performance here in the center of the country, because I firmly believe that we will not stay together as a country unless the heartland does improve its economic performance.
Right. Why is a strong economic performance in the heartland, why is that important to the rest of the country?
Because there would be many social fissures, political result from it. You would have potentially people from the coast feeling that elections were swung in directions because they were disproportionately represented. And there's certain stereotypes amongst some people on the coast about people in the heartland, that somehow your IQ drops when you're in the heartland. That's simply not true. But there is a perception that that's the case, and the heartland has not invested in what I would call the knowledge-based economy as heavily as the coasts have. And we need to change that. We need to educate policy leaders, elected officials, economic development officials as well, and get them to understand how the changing dynamics of what drives economic growth.
Right. So Heartland Forward is it's a nonprofit research institute backed by the Walton family. A think tank in the traditional sense. Most people have heard of that.
They have.
You call yourself a think and do tank. What is the difference in that extra word, a do tank?
Very important distinction,
Right.
Paul. There are lots of what we might refer to as inside the Beltway think tanks that have former politicians, former corporate officials, former heads of the
maybe
Federal Reserve
right
system.
or left leaning.
Exactly.
Right.
They typically are right or left leaning.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty much the position they're going to take on a topic before it comes out, versus what we're trying to do. It's think in a sense that we want our research to demonstrate evidence-based facts that lead to policy prescriptions that can be implemented by officials who can actually change things. So that's why there's a heavy emphasis on the do. It's not just about publishing research that academics might feel warm and fuzzy about. It's about conducting research that has potential impact in terms of implementing policies to try and improve upon the current situation.
Right, putting the research into action is kind of what you're wanting to do. So give us an example of maybe some research that you produce to be used. What's an example of how that's been implemented maybe in the past couple of years, the work you've done at the Walton Family Foundation? What's an example of how you would like the research to be implemented going forward?
So one example, I worked on an initial grant to the University of Arkansas that looked at trying to support applied research at the university, provide the infrastructure in terms of legal protections, intellectual property protections, the technology transfer office investments there, early what I might call the Chancellor's Innovation Fund that tried to bring researchers together across disciplines where they might find ways to merge their ideas that would have a commercial applicability, to basically improve the support structure for those academics and other researchers that wanted to pursue the commercial venue. A lot of work that I had done previously at the Milken Institute showing the importance of research universities that not only conduct outstanding research, but focus on applying it to the commercial sector, either through licensing to existing firms or starting new firms. So that process is kind of underway, working with the leadership team. Joe Steinmetz there, certainly Don Bobbitt at the system level as well. So that's underway. Also, another example is I'm working on the Governor's Innovation Council that's working on trying to develop a new plan for sustainable knowledge-based economic development. And there are several initiatives underway, still in the early stages, but I think will lead to implementation.
So have you found that the policymakers and decision makers who need to be receptive to the research that you're putting together, are those doors opening?
Those doors are opening. I would say there's still some more education and convincing that needs to be accomplished, but that is part of the mission. I have been involved in successful attempts and implementations elsewhere, and so we're in the early stages of that, but clearly University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, and also UAMS in Little Rock and up here as well. There was an initiative underway to try and focus more on commercialization, but this provides better infrastructure support to change the culture to make it more open and engaging to commercialization outcomes, because it is a cultural transformation that's required.
Right, and it's a more sustainable process, which you talked about earlier.
Exactly right, Paul.
When you examine the heartland, the individual cities in the region, I think you've researched all 500 or so, 530 of these areas in the 20 states that we're talking about in the heartland, basically the middle of America. What is the common link that gets these areas as close to their potential as possible? What do you see that links all of these successful areas together?
What you clearly see are areas, places where entrepreneurship is encouraged and fostered, supported, building entrepreneurial awareness. So broad entrepreneurship could be from family businesses of dry cleaners to restaurants. So that kind of broad cultural awareness of the importance of entrepreneurship and supporting it. And then what I might call its knowledge intensity. What I mean by that, these are firms that are started and are scaled up that are trying to penetrate regional, national, international markets that just aren't trying to employ their family members. They're trying to develop companies that eventually might employ 250 to 500 people, mid-sized companies. And that's where you have the big employment impact. And so those areas that have been successful have been engaged in that. They've been investing in higher education and talent, human capital building. You look at Austin, it's a big part of the story there. You look at Nashville. And these communities are leaders. They prove that it can be done in the heartland, but it takes an enlightened leadership and a commitment and a follow-on effort to undertake all these transformational changes.
Describe that. You say it takes a certain kind of leadership group. Describe that leadership group that you found in Arkansas, specifically Northwest Arkansas. Are those enlightened leaders that you're coming face to face with?
I think part of it's corporate leaders. There's clearly that presence and awareness here. It's a talent issue for them as well. If they're going to be able to recruit the top talent, they need to have a more diverse ecosystem, because a lot of young people want to work in a smaller firm. They want to be able to see direct engagement in what they do and how it affects outcomes. You may not necessarily find that at a young age in a corporation, but over time, if they work for that company, might move somewhere else, that's a talent pool that the major employers can draw upon. Also, you need that leadership at the university level. I think we're starting to see that now. There's a commitment to it. There's been a cultural resistance to that change. You need leadership at the governor's level. I think the governor's appointment of the Governor's Innovation Council shows there's a commitment to that. It still requires follow-up and sustainability efforts, but I think we're starting to see signs of that occurring here in the state and throughout the heartland. It's a long slog. It's not going to happen overnight, but without leadership committed to those changes, it won't happen.
Right, so I'm sure you're keeping a close eye on the upcoming governor's race in Arkansas here a couple of years down the road, if that's an important part of the puzzle, it sounds like. Also, an important part, I guess, as a research institute, your research is only as good as the researchers.
Correct.
You've brought some staff along with you from the Walton Foundation, but also made a couple of hires for Heartland Forward. Who's doing the research for you?
Well, myself and one full-time research staff at this point, but we have brought in Richard Florida from the University of Toronto. He of the creative class. Richard and I have collaborated in the past on panels and other research projects. I helped contribute the technology to his 3 Ts from the creative class book that he wrote. Okay. That was a few years ago. We won't go into how many years ago that was. But so Richard has been to the Heartland Summit last year. He'll be at the Heartland Summit coming up in April of 2020. And we currently have a project underway on the importance of young firms and scaling them up and demonstrating all the statistical evidence that shows how job creation is tied to that. And Joel Kotkin, he's at Chapman University, used to be a colleague of mine at the Milken Institute, also works on efforts in the Heartland from Houston. But Joel has a project underway looking at millennials in the Heartland. And so it looks at millennials who are staying here and why. It will also look at millennials that may have been raised here in the Heartland and went to university here that are on the coasts, and interviewing many of them who are making the decision to come back and why. And it relates to very high housing costs on the coasts, and here where you can have a family and be able to afford a house with maybe a small backyard.
All right, very good stuff. All right, well, we, of course, will be excited to report on that research at nwabusinessjournal.com, and there's also more information that what you'll be doing at Heartland Forward.
Heartlandforward.org.
Right, and you're also getting ready for your flagship event next spring, the Heartland Summit in Bentonville, right?
That is correct.
Okay, very good. All right, it's Ross DeVol. He's president and CEO of a new research institute in Bentonville called Heartland Forward. Ross, thanks for dropping by.
Thank you, Paul.
Always
Appreciate it.
Good
Good to see you.
As always, we appreciate you tuning in. I'm Paul Gatling. See you next time.